Good day. This is William Garvey, the host of Plane Talk on Wingspan News. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Walt Fricke, the founder and air boss of the Veterans Airlift Command, also known as VAC. Walt does indeed have a military aviation background, which is part of the founding of the organization. So first off, Walt, welcome. It's very good to see you again.
William, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Let's begin. For those who are unfamiliar with it, can you tell me what is the Veterans Airlift Command and what does it do?
Veterans Airlift Command provides free private air transportation to combat wounded veterans and their family members for medical and other compassionate purposes through a national network of volunteer aircraft owners and pilots.
And Walt, I know that the VAC indeed has roots going back to your experience in Vietnam, and it was an unfortunate experience. Mind telling us about it?
I was a combat helicopter pilot in Vietnam, was wounded in October of 1968, medevaced home to the US to a hospital about 700 miles away from home. I spent about 6 months in recovery, but the period of time between the time I was wounded, medevaced through Saigon, then on to Japan for a couple of weeks, then back to through Alaska and Fort Scott, or Scott Air Force Base, I'm sorry, and then Fort Knox. And then another month went by from that couple of weeks. So it was probably 6 weeks before my family could get the resources together to come and see me in the hospital. And that period of time was difficult for a 19-year-old kid being, combat wounded, going from full fight or flight in Vietnam every day to bang in the hospital and not knowing whether I'm going to lose my leg or whatever. And emotionally, it was a difficult time. So I was in pretty rough shape by the time they got there to see me. And when they did, that's when the healing began. When I realized that whether I lost my leg or not was not important, that they saw me as the same guy that I was before I left and so forth. And I was also engaged at the time, and my now bride of 53 years was with them. And that, of course, had a huge healing impact. After we got out of the Army, because I got medically retired from the Army, about another year and a half went by. I was executive officer of a 700-man, assistant exec of a 700-man unit at Fort Rucker, trying to get back on flight status, and then found that I was going to have to go through a board review and a med board and have a waiver to stay in which they would have allowed. But it took so long to do that I thought, I'll just go get a job flying on the outside. So I took the medical retirement, moved back to Michigan, and the economy was in the dumps in 1970. And so I went back to school at Michigan State. And if you'll recall, that was pretty tumultuous times at Michigan State. I mean, burning buildings and that sort of thing. So I lasted about a year and a half in that environment, and then decided I just needed to go and find my way. So I got into an aviation related business that we fumbled around for a couple of years trying to build a two-place Piper Pawnee ag airplane to train ag pilots. Piper went on strike. They had the flood in the plant, if you'll recall, back in Pennsylvania. We couldn't get parts, and so that kind of melted. And so I took a job at the bank in Michigan National Bank in Lansing, Michigan, and kind of worked my way up as a banker. Moved back to my hometown, Traverse City, the bank where I grew up. They had an airplane. I thought, well, this will be my chance. I can go to work for that. Well, it turns out the airplane was well staffed, and I didn't get to fly like I thought I was going to there. So I got recruited away from the bank to run a crop dusting business and an aircraft sales operation. So I went and did that for a couple of years. That's been, but I'd say my education came as a combat helicopter pilot in Vietnam. That's where I learned leadership and teamwork and decision making, because you had to, life or death decisions were made in a split second, and we did it 10 hours a day every day. Wow. So that's where I think that's where most of my sort of ability to evaluate situational awareness, evaluate and make a decision and execute on it came from my military training, as opposed to a formal education. So I ran a spray operation for a couple of years, then went back to the bank. It was, it's kind of like when you go out to dinner and you can't afford the meal. When you're done, you have to wash dishes. So I went back to the bank to work at the bank. and then transitioned to another finance company and ended up in the investment banking business. A number of things. About every 5 years, I kind of rotate into something new.
Weren't veterans involved with your housing and banking situation?
That's actually an interesting story. That's how we got going. I had a relationship with the DoD because we were concerned about this was in 2001 through 2005, roughly, that I had formed this organization, the Homeownership Preservation Foundation, to get ahead of the foreclosure problem that I saw as looming, heavily. And it didn't hit us for 5 or 6 years after I started this thing, but I could see it coming because of the way the lenders were operating. And I had a relationship with the DoD and was looking for an organization that would help military families who were on, because of the deployments. I didn't want people losing their homes because they're serving their country. So we put up a fund to help renegotiate mortgages for military members. And we used a small nonprofit that the DoD pointed us to, but they knew I was doing this. So when I started the Veterans Airlift Command, the very first mission on the very first day was a wounded Marine from Melbourne, Florida, who had flown on a commercial airplane with frequent flyer tickets from Melbourne to Atlanta to Birmingham to Charlotte to Jackson, North Carolina, to go get his combat. He's in a wheelchair and crutches. You can imagine changing airplanes 5 times, 13 hours from the time he left Melbourne, he got to South Carolina. He could have driven it in half that time. And his father called the DoD, and I had just started the Veterans Airlift Command, hadn't recruited a single pilot yet, didn't know if it was going to work. Had my website up, had everything designed for the technology platform to do it. But I really didn't know it was going to work. The DoD knew that I was doing this, called me and said, we got a call from this kid's father saying, this is terrible. It was very nice of somebody to give him a frequent flyer ticket, but here's what happened. They put him on the flights that had empty seats to get in there. And they said, is there a way to get him home? And they said, we know you're doing this. And I said, well, stand by. And I sent a email to 8 pilots, 4 in Georgia and 4 in Florida, told them the story, told them about the organization I was starting in 1 sentence, less time than it's taken me to tell you this story, said, here's what we're doing. Can you help get this guy back to Melbourne, Florida? 8 guys got the email, 5 of them responded. And I knew right then that the Veterans Airlift Command had legs, that this is something that people would viscerally respond to, which they did. I assigned it to chief counsel for Gulfstream, I think, was the guy who took the mission with his Cessna 210. He called me the night before, said, I've got a problem. He ran out to run up his airplane. He said, I've got a problem with the alternator. I can't get it started. I don't think I can take the mission tomorrow. He couldn't get his alternator online. And so I went back to number 2 in line and said, hey, we got a mechanical on the first trip. Oh, absolutely. And he flew up and got him and flew him home in 2.5 hours the next morning. And we were now a winner for the DoD. They were telling people about us. And I knew we could go. And the guy who flew it was in a Cirrus. And he sent out a message on the Cirrus owners board about the mission, what it meant to him, and sign up. And I had, in 2 weeks, I had like 80 Cirrus pilots around the country had signed up. And we've got Gulfstreams and Falcons and, all kinds of, we have 2,600 volunteers, 2,700 volunteer aircraft owners and pilots right now on the rolls.
The airplane itself, does it have to meet some kind of minimum? Go ahead.
Yeah, we require a high performance aircraft, a single engine. Honestly, 80%, 90% of our missions are done with jets and turboprops. And so we require an IFR flight plan. And of course, everybody that has a jet prop or a turboprop or a jet or a multi-engine airplane or high performance single are very likely going to be instrument rated and file IFR flight plans. So we require an IFR flight plan and instrument rating, current, proficient, and high performance aircraft.
Are all these owner flown?
I'd say 80% are owner flown, and then we have some that are owner owned airplanes that they have a crew that flies them. And these are dedicated missions. They send their airplane like a limousine for the combat wounded vet and family and take them where they need to go. So it's not like, although we're happy to have somebody that's going that way anyway, because I honestly prefer the owner ride along in the airplane. Because there's nothing like this personal thank you, face to face, writing a thank you note with your airplane, but then being involved and engaged with the veteran. It's changed the lives of numerous owners and pilots who get to fly the missions.
Are there requirements on the part of the veterans to be able to access this service?
And they're combat wounded, and that's easy. It's easy to vet. We've flown 19,000 passengers since we started this, and we know everybody. We vetted them, and a lot of them now are multiple people that are going to need private transportation when they travel for life. So we know them, but they're combat wounded. It's easy to vet them. You can Google somebody in their hometown and find out if they really were combat wounded. So you don't get a story from somebody unless it's true. We can vet them.
Understood, but is there a physical requirement? I mean,
typically ambulatory, but we have flown guys with 600-pound wheelchairs. That's a challenge because we have to put them in a Pilatus and we have to load them with a forklift. And so there's a limited number of resources available for those kind of flights. And we don't do air ambulance. But if it's someone who doesn't require onboard medical treatment, or equipment, I had fire departments load guys that were paraplegics with a blanket carry, and lift them up into a comfortable seat in the airplane, and their families with them, and then we get the fire department there. They love doing it. They're sitting around the airport waiting for something to do, and this is training for them. I mean, plus they're veterans, they're brothers. They really appreciate doing it.
What kind of missions can a veteran request?
Sure. We say for medical and other compassionate purposes. Now, other compassionate purposes is if you've got a traumatic brain injury and it's difficult for you to go through an airport and find your way to the gate, or you have prosthetics and it's difficult for you to go through a commercial flight because they remove your prosthetics and treat you worse than anybody else going through the line. Putting them on a private airplane treats them with dignity and love, and the people that are flying them, they know that they're loved by the people that are flying them because they're engaged with them. They're not a number, they're not a piece of baggage.
Has there been a mission or a series of missions that you found particularly rewarding, satisfying?
I'll tell you one that I was on, actually. I was in DC for a meeting and probably having dinner with you. And we were on our way back to Minneapolis. We had a mission that one of our volunteers had flown out to DC to pick up a sergeant major who was a double amputee. Command Sergeant Major, Special Forces, 9 tours in Afghanistan, Iraq. He returned home to be hit by a drunk driver in his driveway while he was working on his car and took off both of his legs. And but this guy was a hero nonetheless. And now he's learning to walk on prosthetics. They were going to fly him home, and I talked to the owner of the airplane because they're taking him to my airport, Crystal Airport, Minneapolis. And I said, "Do you have room for I'm in DC at the same time. Do you have room for a rider on the way back?" He said, "I need a co-pilot." "That's great. I can fly out single pilot, but when we fly passengers, can you ride it in the right seat?" I said, "Sure." So we met out at Leesburg, I think, loaded him into the airport. And as he started to work his way up the steps to get into the King Air, his legs were buckling. He was brand new on the prosthetics. It was very difficult for him. He's trying to back up and work the legs, and he didn't know how to work very well yet. And he was sitting on the floor inside the King Air facing out, and I was behind him, so I was on the step below him just to make sure he didn't fall out. And I thought, boy, are we doing the right thing? I mean, I know if you go on the airlines, I'm picturing past security now. I'm picturing the seat that they put you on, and they wheel you down a ramp and transfer you to a seat in the airplane. And I thought, that seems a lot easier. Maybe are we doing the right thing? And I looked at him, and I was right at eye level with him. And I said, "Let me ask you something. Have you flown commercially since you've been hurt?" He said, "Yes." And I said, tell me how this compares. I mean, the struggle of getting in, and his tears down his cheeks. This is a Command Sergeant Major in the Special Forces, tears up. And he says, "This is 1 billion times better." And I said, "Well, tell me why you say it." "Because I know you guys love me. You're treating me with respect. I don't feel awkward. I don't feel like everybody's staring at me. You're here to help me. And you're putting me in a private airplane, taking me home." He said, and then it was ka-ching. We are doing the right thing.
Volunteer pilots are just that, volunteers. They're volunteering their airplanes. There's obviously expense involved. I mean, with fuel and engine reserve and all of that. Does the VAC contribute to that at all?
No, everything is donated by the supporter, the volunteer, and sometimes way over the top. I mean, you fly a Global Express coast to coast and then get a limo for the passenger to take him to they fall in love with their passengers. I mean, we've had people fly missions and stand up foundations and organizations to go help veterans after flying VAC missions. Wow. They get so fired up about what this means to have this personal interaction with they're just writing a check to somebody. They're actually personally involved with the veterans that they fly, and it's very rewarding. So like I said, we got 2,700 volunteers and we don't have missions go unfulfilled, and people love doing this. I gave out 2 more 100 mission trophies this last weekend at our event. Wow. 100 missions in a Gulf Stream or 100 missions in a citation, or that's significant.
Even though it's all volunteer, there are expenses involved. Do you have benefactors, major benefactors?
Oh yes, we do. Bruce Rose, who's the founder and chairman of Carrington Capital.
Good guy.
Good guy. Yeah. You know him.
Yeah.
He wouldn't fly for us. He'd send his airplane, but he didn't want to go along because he thought emotionally it'd be too tough on him. And he's type-rated in his own airplanes. Very generous with his airplane, his crews. Well, we were taking a combat, a special forces triple amputee home for the first time to Indiana from Walter Reed. And Bruce had signed up, his crew was going to take him home. And I called Bruce up on Monday. The mission was on Thursday. I said, Bruce, you need to fly this mission. And he said, I can't. He said, Thursday is completely booked. It's something I've been trying to get done for 3 months. I finally got this meeting arranged and I can't miss this meeting on Thursday. And he said, I'm not sure I can handle it emotionally anyway, but because it's tough seeing these guys. I said, Bruce, I don't know what you're doing on Thursday. I don't know what your meeting is about or who it is, but I can tell you this, in 10 years, you won't be able to tell me what it was. You fly this mission in 10 years, you're still going to be talking. You're still going to be talking about it. And he said, gauntlet thrown, challenge taken. And he canceled the meeting he had on Thursday, rescheduled it, and flew the mission. The result of that is he built that young man and his family their home.
Wow.
Wow. And not only that, he stood up a foundation, had a fundraiser for the Veterans Airlift Command. And the second year started building homes. I think he's built 27 homes for wounded veterans. He's gotten involved in all kinds of other activities as a result of flying one mission for the VAC. So the ripple effect of this has been immense. That he's not the only one. You know, there are a number of other folks who have engaged with the mission and then saw the opportunity to engage in the lives of these people.
If there are people who are unfamiliar with the Veterans Airlift Command, how can they learn more? How can they contribute? Where do they go?
Veteransairlift.org. Just put Veterans Airlift Command in the Google bar and you'll find all kinds of resources. But I would say focus on our website if you're interested in participating, because there you'll find a donate button. There you'll find a register your airplane button. Or if you're a combat wounded veteran, there you'll find a trip request, a passenger trip request. And one of the things that we are is high on compassion, low on red tape. So that has been right from the beginning and it hasn't changed. When a veteran puts in a travel request, all he really needs to put in is his name, his phone number to get a hold of him, and an email address, when and where he wants to travel. There's no send us a copy of your DD-214 and your Social Security, you know, a copy of your driver's license, none of that. So the vets love it because it's like we treat them with the kind of respect that if you're flying on a private jet, you'd be treated with.
Well, thank you, Walt. That was a wonderful story and a wonderful organization. We've been speaking with Walt Fricke, the founder and air boss of the Veterans Airlift Command. I'm William Garvey, the host of Plane Talk. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest, and keep the VAC in mind.